Every morning, the drain tells the story before you do. You reach for the shampoo, run your fingers through your hair, and a moment later, you're looking at your palm more than yesterday, more than last month. You tell yourself it's the water, it's the stress, it's just getting older. Then you catch yourself in a certain light, the bathroom mirror, a shop window, a photo someone took without warning, and you see it. The part is wider, the temples are different. The volume that used to be there simply isn't. You've tried the thickening shampoos, the biotin supplements, the scalp serums that cost more than a decent dinner. Maybe you've been stirring collagen powder into your morning coffee because something online said to. You've changed pillowcases. You've stopped heat styling. You've done everything the articles told you to do, and your hair keeps thinning. Here is what no one has told you yet. What you're watching in that drain every morning is not hair loss. It is a signal that something specific, something identifiable and correctable is happening inside your body. And the location of the problem is almost certainly not your scalp. In the overwhelming majority of people over 60 who experience progressive hair thinning, the root cause, and I mean the actual biological root, lives in the gut. Not genetics, not age, not the shampoo you've been using for 30 years. The gut. And the single most effective, lowest cost intervention for this specific mechanism costs less than $2 a week and has been sitting in the refrigerated section of your grocery store your entire life. Let me describe the experience more precisely, because the details matter. Hair thinning after 60 rarely announces itself all at once. It arrives gradually. You notice it first in the shower, then in the brush, then in the part. The strands themselves often change finer, more fragile, breaking rather than falling cleanly from the root. Regrowth slows. New hairs that come in are thinner than the ones they replaced. The overall texture changes. It lies differently. It responds to humidity differently. Products that worked for years suddenly don't. This pattern, gradual, diffuse, affecting overall density rather than creating bald patches, is called diffuse alopecia. It is the most common pattern of hair thinning in both men and women after 60. Most people with this pattern have been told one of three things. It's genetic, it's hormonal, it's just what happens. Here is what is wrong with all three answers. They describe a destination without explaining how the road got there. Genetics and hormones are real factors, but they operate through mechanisms. Specific biochemical chains of events that can be influenced. It's genetic and it's aging are not diagnoses, they are surrenders. And they point you directly away from the actual problem. The system is built to manage symptoms, not correct causes. There is no billing code for restoring a gut microbiome. So this conversation is not happening at your next appointment. It is happening here. Before we get into the 5 specific factors driving this, I need to demolish one belief that is slowing people down. Biotin deficiency causes hair loss. You have seen this on every bottle of hair supplement ever manufactured. The science behind it is almost entirely unsupported for healthy adults. A comprehensive review published in the journal Skin Appendage Disorders found that true biotin deficiency is exceedingly rare in adults eating a normal diet, and that the evidence for biotin supplementation improving hair in people who are not genuinely deficient is essentially absent. What that means is this: if you have been taking biotin for 6 months and your hair is still thinning, it is not because you need more biotin. It is because biotin was never the problem. The problem is something else. And that something else is exactly what we are going to address. Think of your hair follicles the way you would think of outposts at the very end of a long supply chain. Your body at any given moment is making hundreds of allocation decisions about where to send nutrients, oxygen, and building materials. The brain gets priority, the heart gets priority. The liver, the kidneys, the immune system, all ahead in the queue. Hair follicles are the last stop on the delivery route. When the supply chain runs normally, when absorption is efficient, reserves are full, and the distribution system is healthy, even the last stop gets what it needs. The follicle receives its keratin building materials, its iron, its amino acids. Hair grows thick and strong. But when there is a disruption anywhere along that chain, a breakdown in the gut, a depletion of stored minerals, a chronic inflammatory signal running in the background, the system begins making cuts. And it always cuts from the end of the route first. The brain will not be sacrificed, the heart will not be sacrificed, hair will be sacrificed. What you are watching in the drain every morning is the end result of cuts made somewhere earlier in that chain. Our job today is to find exactly where those cuts are being made. Before we go any further, a direct word about when this stops being a lifestyle question and becomes a clinical one. If your hair loss is patchy, circular, or oval bald spots rather than overall thinning, that is a different condition called alopecia areata, which involves an autoimmune response, and it warrants evaluation by a dermatologist. If hair loss is accompanied by sudden, unexplained weight loss, more than 10 pounds in 2 months without dieting, see a clinician before doing anything else. If you are also experiencing significant fatigue, extreme cold sensitivity, facial swelling, and hair loss that has come on relatively quickly, these signs together may indicate a thyroid condition that requires a blood test and medical management, not a protocol. And if you have noticed hair loss specifically at the outer third of your eyebrows, the portion closest to your temples, combined with any of the symptoms above, do not wait. That specific pattern is strongly associated with thyroid dysfunction and warrants a TSH panel this week. For everyone else, diffuse, gradual thinning over months or years, no alarming accompanying symptoms, the 5 mechanisms we are about to discuss are exactly where to look. The first factor, and the one that connects most directly to today's central claim, is the gut microbiome. Your gut is not simply a tube that food passes through. It is an ecosystem, a community of approximately 38 trillion microorganisms, mostly bacteria, that govern processes you are almost certainly not aware of. They synthesize vitamins. They calibrate immune responses throughout the entire body. They regulate inflammation from the inside. And critically for our topic today, they determine how effectively your intestinal wall absorbs nutrients. Here is the mechanism that matters. When your microbiome is healthy, when beneficial bacteria are numerous and diverse, they maintain the lining of your small intestine as a tight, selective barrier. Nutrients cross into the bloodstream in their correct, usable form. Iron is absorbed, zinc is absorbed. B12 and folate, the B vitamins that genuinely do matter for hair, are absorbed. The raw materials for keratin, the protein that constitutes roughly 95% of your hair shaft, arrive at the follicle in forms the cell can actually use. When beneficial bacteria decline due to antibiotic use, a diet low in fiber, chronic stress, or simply the natural shifts that occur in the gut ecosystem, after 60, the intestinal barrier becomes permeable. The technical term is increased intestinal permeability. Through the weakened wall, bacterial fragments and other substances enter the bloodstream. The immune system responds with low-grade chronic inflammation, no fever, no specific pain, nothing dramatic enough to send you to a doctor, just a background threat signal running constantly. That chronic inflammatory state does 2 things to your hair. First, it disrupts the hair growth cycle. Each follicle moves through 3 phases: growth, transition, and rest. Chronic inflammation extends the rest phase and shortens the growth phase. Fewer follicles are actively producing hair at any given moment. Second, that same inflammatory signal impairs nutrient absorption at the gut wall, creating a deficiency spiral. The gut is inflamed, so it absorbs less. The follicle receives less of what it needs. The inflammatory signal intensifies. Absorption worsens further. This is the loop that biotin cannot break, because biotin was never part of building the loop. The intervention that does work is restoring the microbiome. And the most effective, most accessible, lowest cost tool for doing that is plain kefir. Not flavored yogurt, not probiotic gummies, plain kefir, the simplest variety available with a shelf life of 7 days or fewer. The shorter the shelf life, the higher the concentration of live bacterial cultures. 1 glass consumed at night, before bed, specifically at night, Because the gut performs its most active repair and microbial integration during sleep, the bacteria from the kefir colonize more effectively when you are horizontal and resting. One glass, every night, under $2 a week at any grocery store. This is the cheap drink. And it is not a supplement, it is food that restores a system that should never have been depleted. The second factor surprises almost everyone who hears it, because most people with this cause have already had blood work done and been told their iron is normal. It is not hemoglobin that matters for hair, it is ferritin. Hemoglobin is the protein in red blood cells that carries oxygen. When it drops significantly, you develop anemia, fatigue, pallor, the classic symptoms. Doctors test for it routinely. Ferritin is something different. Ferritin is the body's iron storage protein. It represents the reserve iron held for non-emergency use. Hair follicle function is a non-emergency use. When ferritin levels fall below approximately 40 to 70 nanograms per milliliter, the range hair follicles require for normal function, the body begins diverting stored iron away from hair production and toward more essential functions. Standard blood panels often only flag ferritin below 12 or 15, which is the threshold for clinical anemia. Your hair follicles begin struggling at levels 2 to 5 times higher than that flagged threshold. Ask for a ferritin level specifically, not just iron, not just hemoglobin, ferritin. If the number comes back below 50 and your hair is thinning, you have found a significant piece of your answer. Food-based ferritin support, beef liver, 1 portion twice a week, provides the most bioavailable iron available in any food. Pair it with a vitamin C source at the same meal, a squeeze of lemon on the meat, or a small portion of red bell pepper alongside. Vitamin C increases the absorption of plant and animal-based iron by up to 67%. The third factor is thyroid function, but not the kind most standard panels will catch. A full thyroid panel includes TSH, which is thyroid-stimulating hormone, free T3 and free T4. Many routine panels run only TSH. TSH can appear normal while free T3, the active thyroid hormone, the one that enters cells and governs their metabolic rate, sits at the low end of the reference range. The thyroid regulates the pace of every biological process, including the rate at which hair follicle cells divide and produce keratin. A thyroid operating at the lower edge of normal is like a factory running at 70% capacity. The output looks almost acceptable from a distance, but over months and years, the cumulative deficit appears in energy levels, in body temperature regulation, in the rate of nail growth, and in hair density. If your thyroid numbers have come back normal, but you have persistent cold sensitivity, slightly slower digestion than you used to, and gradual hair thinning, discuss free T3, specifically with whoever manages your care. The fourth factor is one of the most important and the least discussed. Most people who hear it immediately say, "But I eat plenty of protein." The issue is not how much protein you eat. The issue is how much of it your gut converts into the specific amino acids your follicles can actually use. Keratin, the structural protein of hair, is built primarily from cysteine, lysine, and methionine. These amino acids are released from dietary protein during digestion, then absorbed across the intestinal wall. If either stage of that process is compromised, if stomach acid production is insufficient, which becomes progressively more common after 60 and is dramatically underdiagnosed, or if the intestinal wall is inflamed, protein passes through partially undigested or in forms that cannot be efficiently absorbed. You eat the chicken breast, your gut fails to fully break it down. The cysteine, lysine, and methionine that your follicles require never arrive at the bloodstream in usable form. The follicle receives a deficient supply of its primary raw material. Hair becomes finer, growth slows. This is why the gut is the central mechanism, not only because of inflammation and mineral absorption, but because the gut is also the primary site of protein breakdown. Restore gut function and protein utilization improves alongside mineral absorption at the same time. A practical step beyond kefir, bone broth. Slow-cooked bone broth contains pre-digested collagen proteins, amino acid chains already partially broken down by the long cooking process, making fewer demands on a compromised digestive system. 1 cup daily with lunch, homemade from any bones, simmered for a minimum of 4 hours, or store-bought with no additives or added sodium. The fifth factor is the one that, in practice, can override every other intervention combined if it is not addressed. Chronic stress, not the acute stress of a difficult week. The low-level, sustained, habitually ignored stress that has become the background noise of daily life for most people over 60, financial worry, health anxiety, the accumulated weight of decades of responsibility, the particular loneliness that can settle in during this chapter of life in ways that are rarely spoken about directly. Here's the mechanism. Under chronic stress, the adrenal glands, two small glands positioned atop your kidneys, maintain elevated cortisol production. Cortisol is the body's primary stress hormone. In short bursts, it is protective and essential. In chronic elevation, it is destructive in very specific ways. Elevated cortisol directly accelerates the transition of hair follicles from the growth phase into the resting phase. It does this by acting on specific receptors within the follicle itself. This is not a metaphor. Cortisol physically shortens the active production period of each follicle and lengthens the dormant period. Fewer follicles producing hair simultaneously means visibly lower density over time without a single strand falling out dramatically. Chronic cortisol elevation also suppresses the immune regulation required for a healthy gut lining, which brings us directly back to the first factor. Stress damages the microbiome. A damaged microbiome reduces nutrient absorption. Reduced absorption starves follicles. And people under chronic stress often reach for processed food, alcohol, and sugar in the evenings, which further deplete the bacterial communities the gut needs. The loop closes back on itself. The intervention here is specific, not reduce stress. That is not a protocol. This is the 4-7-8 breath. Sit comfortably or lie down. Place one hand on your chest and one on your abdomen. Inhale slowly through the nose for a count of 4. Your abdomen should rise. Your chest should remain still. Hold for a count of 7 without strain. Exhale slowly through the mouth for a count of 8, long, deliberate, like blowing out a candle positioned at the far end of a long room. 4 complete cycles, 2 minutes total. This activates the vagus nerve, the primary trunk of the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the biological counterweight to the stress response. Heart rate slows, blood pressure drops, cortisol production decreases. The follicle receives a different chemical environment to operate in. Do this every night before sleep, immediately after the kefir, 2 minutes in 1 glass. The combination addresses the cortisol mechanism and the microbiome mechanism simultaneously in the same sitting at the end of every day. Here is the complete protocol, sequenced as a single daily practice. Morning. Immediately after waking, before coffee, drink a glass of warm water body temperature, approximately 98 degrees, with the juice of a quarter lemon. This gently stimulates bile production and prepares the gut for efficient absorption from the first meal. If you have elevated stomach acid or an active ulcer, substitute half a teaspoon of honey in warm water. With breakfast, real oats, 3 tablespoons dry weight, cooked 15 minutes on the stove, not instant packets. Plain oats are one of the richest accessible sources of beta-glucan, a fiber that selectively feeds beneficial gut bacteria. The oatmeal is what gives the kefir bacteria something to thrive on through the day. Kefir repopulates. Oatmeal sustains. Twice weekly at lunch, a portion of beef liver with a squeeze of lemon or a small serving of red bell pepper alongside. Ferritin support, the most bioavailable iron source available in ordinary food. Daily with any meal. A tablespoon of raw unsalted pumpkin seeds, roughly a small palmful, or 2 tablespoons of tomato paste added to any cooked dish. Pumpkin seeds provide zinc in highly bioavailable form. Zinc is the mineral without which keratin production stalls at the cellular level, and it is commonly deficient in people over 60. Zinc cannot be efficiently absorbed from a compromised gut, which is precisely why restoring the gut is the first step, not the third. Evening, remove processed cheese, cured meats, and sweet foods after 6 o'clock. Hidden sodium and evening sugar both increase systemic inflammation, the same inflammation shortening your follicle growth cycle. This is a subtraction from the evening, not an addition. It costs nothing. Before bed, 1 glass of plain kefir, simplest variety, shortest shelf life available, room temperature or cool, never heated. Heating kills the live cultures. Follow it with 4 cycles of 4-7-8 breathing, then sleep. That is the complete protocol. 1 grocery list change, 1 subtraction from the evening, 1 glass, 2 minutes of breathing every night. Consider someone I'll call Eleanor, 67 years old, retired, sharp and attentive, the kind of person who had researched her situation thoroughly before arriving anywhere for help. She had been dealing with progressive hair thinning for 4 years. She had tried 3 different biotin supplements, one at prescription strength. She had a full blood panel done twice, hemoglobin, normal. TSH, within range. Iron, acceptable. She was told both times that her blood work was unremarkable. She was advised to accept that this was hormonal and age-related. What was never ordered was a ferritin level, and no one had ever asked about her gut. When she described her broader picture bloating after most meals, 2 courses of antibiotics in the previous 18 months for recurring urinary infections, significant sleep disruption from low-level chronic worry, and a diet that had quietly shifted toward convenience foods because cooking for one had begun to feel like too much effort, the picture was clear. Her gut ecosystem had been compromised twice by antibiotics and never rebuilt. Her absorption of iron, zinc, and protein-derived amino acids had been impaired for nearly 2 years before the hair loss became noticeable. Her ferritin, when finally tested, came back at 22, well below the functional threshold for healthy follicle activity, but above the threshold that triggers an anemia diagnosis on a standard panel. The standard blood work had found nothing wrong because it had been measuring the wrong number. She began the protocol: plain kefir every night, oatmeal every morning, liver twice a week, pumpkin seeds daily, the evening dietary changes, 4 cycles of breathing before sleep. In the first month, the change appeared in the shower, not hair growing back, but less hair coming out. The rate of loss decreased. By month 2, she noticed shorter, finer hairs at the temples, the regrowth phase beginning. By month 4, a measurable change in overall density, not identical to 10 years earlier, but photographically, visibly different from where she had started. Eleanor did not change her genetics. She did not take a prescription. She restored the system that had stopped delivering what her follicles needed. 2 things you can check tonight at home with no equipment. First, run the pads of your fingers from the front hairline slowly along the crown toward the back of your head. Apply light pressure and feel the diameter of individual strands close to the scalp. Then move to the back of your head, the lower occipital area, and do the same. Blood supply to the back of the scalp is typically the most robust. If the crown strands feel noticeably finer or more sparse than the strands at the back, you are detecting a circulation and nutrient delivery pattern consistent with the mechanisms we have discussed today. Second, at your next routine appointment, request that ferritin be added specifically to your blood panel, not iron, not hemoglobin. Ferritin by name as a separate line item. If the number comes back below 50 and your hair is thinning, you have a clear, addressable target. One question before we close. How old are you? Write it in the comments. The mechanisms we have covered today accelerate measurably after 60 gut microbiome diversity declines. Ferritin reserves drop faster, thyroid sensitivity decreases, and cortisol regulation becomes progressively less efficient. Knowing where you are in that curve determines what I address next. Your age, written in the comments, shapes this channel directly. Thin hair after 60 is not an aesthetic problem. It is a signal from a supply chain that has been disrupted at a specific point, usually the gut, usually compounded by depleted ferritin, impaired protein absorption, a thyroid running quietly below optimal, and cortisol that has never had a real off switch. 1 glass of plain kefir every night addresses the foundation of that disruption directly. The other steps build on it. This is not complicated, it is not expensive, It requires only understanding where the problem actually lives and the consistency to address it at the source.